its staff, management, or sponsors.
Are you a family caregiver? Are you caregiving for someone who can no longer take care of themselves? Are you overwhelmed? This is Caregiver Solutions Info with Marcia Teele. Marcia will be hosting an hour of true stories and information, tips and updates of the latest research and necessary information in the caregiving field, focusing on you, the family caregiver. An Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert, Marcia has 15 years of hands-on experience at Arden Courts, a leader in assisted living dementia communities here in the U.S. Marcia covers everything you need to know as a family caregiver, especially if you care for a loved one with Alzheimer's disease or other related dementia or chronic illness. If you have a friend or relative that is also a family caregiver, call them now. They won't want to miss a minute. And let them know they can watch on caregiversolutions.info. And they can listen on WNN 1470 AM in South Florida or nationally on the iHeartRadio app. Now, sit back, relax, and learn from our host, Marcia Teele, as she brings information to you that may just be the caregiving solution you need.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Caregiver Solution Info Show. I'm glad you could join us today. This program is for family caregivers, people that care for other adults that can't care for themselves, especially people that suffer from chronic illnesses and Alzheimer's dementia. We talk a lot on the show about what's good for caregivers, what caregivers need to know. Today, we're actually going to have a caregiver joining us, and we're going to talk about support group meetings and about how support can help a caregiver. But after someone passes away and the person you're caring for passes away, what happens? Is there any support for that? And we don't talk a lot about the bereavement. We don't talk about what happens to the caregiver after their loved one passes. So today we're going to talk about that and more. And here to join me, I have two very special guests. I have Teele Kinzer. Teele is a licensed clinical social worker, and she's with Albert Jewish Family Services. She facilitates caregiver groups and bereavement groups. And also joining us today is Rosemary Gensler. Rosemary is a wonderful lady who was a family caregiver taking care of her spouse, and she's going to share some of her story with us today. Welcome, ladies, to the show.
Thank you for having us.
So, Teele, you have facilitated quite a few caregiver groups. You've been doing this for many years. So, as a clinical licensed social worker, why is it important for a caregiver to go to a support group? And if they've never been, what can someone expect when they attend a caregiver group?
And as you stated, most of the people that come to a caregiver group are family members caring for a loved one who no longer can care for themselves. And a caregiver group is a place where they can get the kind of support that they need. It is a very challenging and difficult task to take care of a loved one and watch them decline before their eyes. And so coming to a caregiver support group, they are meeting with other people who may be going through similar situations. And I believe that most of us, what we need more than anything is not only to be heard, but to be understood. And in the support group, they receive that understanding. For instance, someone in the group may present a difficult situation, and another member might say, you know, I had something similar to that, and this is what worked for me. And so it's important that they come and that they should expect to be able to share what their situation is in an atmosphere where it's safe and where they are not judged. I often tell people in my groups, I'm in the understanding business, not the judging business. And that's what I ask of everyone that's in the group, that we're here to understand one another. And it never ceases to amaze me, Marcia, how people are there for one another. So I think that a caregiver group really is an important place that those of you that are out there caring for a loved one, you don't have to do it all alone. There is a place where you can meet with other people and get that support and understanding that you deserve.
Thank you, Dale. You did mention that caregivers get together in the groups and share their circumstances. What about sharing their feelings, and why is it important for caregivers to share their feelings?
They absolutely do. And that's something that I encourage. And that's why it's so important for people to know that when they come into a caregiver group, everything is kept private and confidential. Anything that's said in the group stays in the group because you want people to be able to come in and really share the feelings that they're going through. And why is it important? Well, feelings have a way, when we try to ignore them or distract ourselves, they have a way of coming back at us. And the only way we can really heal and go forward is to deal with our feelings. And I don't know if you want me to share some of the feelings that come up in a group.
Yeah, let's talk
Feelings,
about some of those feelings.
they can feel overwhelmed because it's such a difficult task taking care of someone else. They can feel tremendous anger, especially for people that are older that expect the golden years and it's not golden. And they're angry that their loved one is sick. And when a loved one's caregiver gets a diagnosis, let's say for Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia, the caregiver is getting that diagnosis too. Their life has changed as well. It impacts the whole family. So when they hold those feelings in and they don't share it, that energy has to go someplace. And it often goes to their own physical health or mental health. And so the more one can share their feelings and get it out and release it, the more they can help themselves. And they also help others all the time because people connect to the feelings.
So there are a lot of feelings that caregivers experience, and you mentioned a couple of them. One of them that I hear a lot from caregivers as they're caring for somebody else, they feel guilty.
No.
Can you explain why a caregiver who's giving care to someone
Mhm.
else and doing for somebody else, why would they feel guilty?
Not everyone experiences all the feelings we're talking about, but as you said, many do feel guilty. For instance, a spouse, a woman might say, "How can I go out to lunch with my friend when my husband isn't able to? How can I go and play mahjong when my husband is home alone, is not able to?" And there's tremendous guilt that they are not suffering, at least physically, and their loved one is. And they almost feel sometimes that it's a disloyalty to go and enjoy themselves. And I think it's important that one of the things that I stress is that the caregiver has a right to take care of themselves. What people don't realize is that often many caregivers die before the very person they're caring for. And an analogy that I usually share with the group is when you go on a flight and a flight attendant says, "Those of you traveling with young children, take the oxygen in mask in first and then give it to your child." Well, I try to stress to the caregiver that you need to take the oxygen in first. If you don't, you're not going to be there to care for and to give the oxygen and care for your loved one who you want to take care of. So I often stress that it is an unselfish act and there is no reason to feel guilty for you to do the things that make you feel better. When someone can do the activities that re energize them, they can come back to their caregiver situation and be more understanding and be more patient. But if they constantly are drained out of guilt and not taking care of themselves, they won't be able to cope as well with their loved ones. So everyone benefits when a caregiver takes care of themselves.
Absolutely. You also mentioned anger. I want to go back to that one because what is the caregiver or who is the caregiver? Could be what or who. Where's that anger coming from and where is it directed?
Okay, it could be many answers to that. The anger can be, the caregiver can be angry at the medical field for not caring for their loved one. They can be angry at their loved one for their illness because feelings don't have to be rational. Feelings just are. And often we acting on feelings that sometimes may be helpful, but other times it may not. But we always have a right to our feelings. And so anger is something that is very common that we humans feel. And behind the anger is really feelings of helplessness. When a caregiver doesn't know what to do and they feel helpless, what they might express is their anger. Or when a loved one is asking the same question over and over again, they are frustrated and they get angry. And it's understandable because we're human. But in the caregiver group, they will learn better ways to deal with those feelings. If I may, I just wanted to go back to guilt, because one of the things that I think is important to share is that one of the members that I had in a group many years ago, a lovely woman who took major care, wonderful care of her husband. But at one time when she was under so much stress and so exhausted, she came into group and she said that she feels guilty. She feels guilty because she had the thought that she wanted it all to be over with. And she felt terrible about that thought. But the response from the group and myself was, well, why wouldn't you? None of us want to watch our loved ones in pain, and none of us want to see them decline before our eyes. And she wasn't saying that she didn't want him anymore, but she didn't want that situation. And she has a right to those feelings.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. That's a different perspective altogether. I'd like to
Mhm.
talk to Rosemary for a few minutes. Rosemary, you were a caregiver for your husband. Can you tell us a
Right.
little bit about what happened, your circumstance, and how it affected you with your husband?
Sure. I noticed that my husband was slowing down. There was no question about it. And he was, instead of walking, he was shuffling, and I would tell him not to shuffle, to walk. And it just kept getting worse. And so my daughter and I we took him to a neurologist, and he was diagnosed with early dementia. And how does it affect you? You feel like you're slapped in the face, really, and it's everything that Dale said is true. And through Albert Jewish Family Services, I was in a COVID support group. And from there, I went to Dale. And I have to say, I'm still going to the dementia support group. It was the smartest thing I did. It was my savior. And I learned there were many situations that I didn't know how to handle on my own. And I learned eventually from them that a lot of what I was concerned about and angry about, my husband repeating himself and not being able to do certain things, which I thought he should be able to do, it really wasn't his fault. And I think that's the biggest lesson a caregiver has to learn, is that it is not their fault. And once you can face that, then you can go on with doing your best as a caregiver. But if you can't accept it, then you're just going to keep hitting a brick wall.
So you decided to join a caregiver group. Was that something that maybe your family or friends encouraged you to do? And were you open to that, or were you a little bit hesitant about it? And when you went, how did it help you?
Well, my daughter really put me in touch with the family services first. And from there, when I would tell her something that I wanted to do, or should I do it? And the idea came up for the dementia support group. And I felt the first time I went to Dale's group, I felt a little bit intimidated because here these people knew each other. But I have to tell you, it is such a cohesive group. They are the most caring people. I had to tell them my husband died, which was not easy. They were wonderful. They still are. And it's really a place to go where not only do you get answers, you become friends, you find solace, you find comfort. And caregivers may not say it and they may not admit it, but they do need comfort.
Absolutely.
Yes, ma'am, they sure do. So, Rosemary, thank you for sharing your story. Besides
Welcome.
going to the caregiver support group to help you deal with your husband's behaviors and to learn more about why he was being the way he was being, you found another outlet to help you get through some of these feelings, and that is by creative writing. And tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I've been writing for a number of years, but in the last few years, I've become more serious about it. And I was given an assignment in a class to write about a protagonist and an antagonist. And I asked my teacher, can I make my husband the protagonist and Dementia the antagonist? And she said, try it. So I did. And the reason I chose to do that was that most of the things we read are technical. And they tell you how to do this or how to do that, but they don't give you, for lack of a better word, the guts of it. And I wanted to write how one really, really feels. And that's what I attempted to do.
Well, would you care to share your little essay with us today?
Sure, I'd be happy to. The protagonist is my husband. The protagonist, who am I? I used to know who I am. Today, well, I'm not so sure anymore. There are times my mind is clear and other times when I am completely and utterly confused. How did this happen? Why did it happen? The answer remains elusive. I loved my life until about 3 years ago. Once a poor boy growing up in Yonkers, New York, I became an established, well-known vascular surgeon on Long Island, New York. I was a devoted husband, father, and grandfather. Married to my loving wife for over 54 years, had my dream house on the water, and was able to indulge my hobbies of woodworking, gardening, and fishing. While my career flourished, so did my family. I was proud of my 3 kids who excelled academically, and I enjoyed watching them participate in sports, extracurricular activities, and helping each other as well as their friends. All 3 of them are as beautiful inside as they are outside. Not that they didn't help me turn my hair gray or worry me. They did. It brought normalcy to my life, too. Before I knew it, life had changed. I'd grown older, reaching the time when I could retire. It was both a happy and sad time. How had it come upon me so fast? My wife and I decided to buy a place in Florida, dividing our time there and on Long Island. Until 3 years ago, it was ideal. We loved the back and forth until I decided I'd had enough. No longer able to navigate stairs, the Florida house on one level was the logical place to be, embarking on a new chapter in our lives. About 3 years ago, my wife and I noticed my memory was not quite as sharp. I began forgetting things, as well as having an increased body weakness. Over time, it got worse. A neurologist diagnosed me with mild cognitive impairment, a form of early dementia. Its progress is erratic. One day is good, the next day is not. I wish I could predict what will happen, but I can't. I don't know myself. My mind gets foggy. I want it clear, but at times cannot make it so. What will the future bring? I do not know. Maybe I will never know. The antagonist. I know who you are. What a life I lead. Choosing my victims is easy for me, hard for them. There is no rhyme nor reason to my methods. I come and go as I please, insidiously selecting whom I please when I please, invading their minds, sometimes mildly, other times fiercely. There are those who like to hide from me, but they cannot. I'm sorry. But they think if their minds are active, all will be well. I will tell you it is not so. It is purely the luck of the draw. The scientific world is still attempting to find an answer to my whys and wherefores. If one day it does, and many hope it will be so, I will be finished, totally done. In the meantime, approximately 3 years ago, I remember it so clearly, I decided to start my journey into his brain. He and his wife were on their way to dinner listening to opera. It happened to be their favorite aria from La Boheme, which always reduces her to tears. At the end of the aria, he turned and asked, What opera was that from? She was stunned. I was not. It was the beginning. Over the next year or so, little things would happen that he didn't understand. He'd constantly ask her, "Where are my keys? Did you see my glasses? Do you know where my book is?" It was an unending din, which at first was thought to be a natural part of aging. I took care of that. Soon, forgetting things combined with a decline in physical strength was more the norm than not. It became apparent he was on the decline. A neurologist tested him, informing the family he had mild cognitive impairment or early dementia, and it was assaulting his brain where it would remain. Yes, that's my doing, my work being recognized. Good. Traumatic? Definitely. Insidious? Yes. What will the future bring? Only I know for sure.
Wow, Rosemary, thank you for sharing that. Again, the first part, you wrote both sides, of course, of that. And the first part was from your husband's perspective. And the second part was from the perspective of a persona of dementia, of an Alzheimer's or a dementia speaking to us about the disease and how that persona of the dementia affected a person, in this case, your husband. So that very well written, and thank you for sharing that. The
Thank you.
feelings are very passionate and very personal, and very, very, very good job of explaining both sides of it. I really appreciate that. We are going to take a quick break, and we're going to be giving away a free book. So stay with us and get a pen and pencil ready and a piece of paper, and you'll want to write this down because it's a great book, and if you don't have it, you're going to want to get it. So we'll be right back. Stay with us.
Arden Courts is not just a place to live, it's a place to call home. Residential living combined with quality caregiving. This is the philosophy behind Arden Courts. Communities created exclusively for individuals with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia who would benefit from a safe and structured environment. For additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides, call 888-478-2410 to locate a community nearest you. Inquire about our educational seminars, resource library, or support groups, or simply feel free to ask questions you may have about Alzheimer's and related dementias. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410 for additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides. You are listening to your host, Marcia Teele, an Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert on caregiversolutions.info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
At this time, I'd like to thank our national sponsor, Arden Courts Memory Care Community. Arden Courts is a leader when it comes to memory care for people suffering with different forms of memory loss, and they're also there for you, the family caregiver. Because you're listening to the show on the radio or watching it live stream on the Caregiver Solution website, we want to let you know that you can get this book, The 36-Hour Day, absolutely free. This is a wonderful resource for family caregivers talking about different forms of dementia, giving lots of information, tips, definitions. The book is wonderful to read. If you don't have this book, all you have to do is send an email with your name, address, and telephone number to delray@arden-courts.com. Tell them that you heard about the free offer of the 36-hour day on the Caregiver Solutions Info Show, and they'll be happy to send it right to your door. Again, that email address is delray, DELRAY, at Arden, ARDEN, courts, COURTS.com. I am so happy to have my special guest with me today. Dale Kinzer, who is a licensed clinical social worker with Alpert Jewish Family Services, and also Rosemary Gensler, who was a caregiver for her husband who had dementia. And I wanted to say to you, Rosemary, I know he passed earlier this year. I wanted to say how sorry I am for your loss. I appreciate you both being on the program to share this important topic, because we're talking about caregivers and we're talking about caregivers getting support. But caregivers need support during the time they're caregiving, but also the time after their caregiving ends. And that's called bereavement support. Now, Dale, you also run bereavement support groups, bereavement programs for people who have lost a spouse or another loved one. And it doesn't have to be from dementia. It could be maybe they lost someone
Absolutely.
to cancer, right?
Hmm.
Some other type of disease or ailment, because a caregiver is a caregiver no matter what the disease is. They're doing the same thing, they're going through the same emotions. So tell me why you have bereavement support groups and why it's important, Dale, for people to maybe go to those to experience something that they normally may not be able to go through if they weren't in a group.
It's an interesting thing, Marcia. The longer we live, the more losses we're going to experience. And yet, grief is something that so many people are not educated about and don't really know all that grief entails. And I think what Rosemary said earlier, a lot of the books out there don't really discuss all the feelings that one has. With, I think it's important, and what a bereavement group offers is, for example, I run a group for the loss of a spouse or a significant other life partner, that type of relationship. And what they are able to gain is at a time when they are so vulnerable and in so much pain, they can be with other people that can again understand what they're going through, because they're going through it too. And the way we set up the group is that people come in within the same time frame of their loss, and I can control the size so that they can open up and share in a group, in an intimate group where they can feel safe to do so. And what is so important is that, unfortunately, because a lot of people out there are uneducated about grief, they don't always have an avenue to really talk about what's really going on. Let me give you an example. I may ask in groups, so when someone asks me, "How are you?" They ask the spouse, that the widow, and she'll say, "Oh, I'm fine." Do they really want to know how I'm feeling? And I often say to them, you always have a right to pick and choose who you want to share with. But when you answer the question, "I'm fine," like this grief business is so easy, when it's not, we're not really educating them. And so what we come up with is a more honest and truthful answer, is that when they are asked that, they're told, "I'm doing the best I can." Because the truth is, at that moment in time, they're doing the best they can. But it's often so difficult because at the time, as I said, that they're most vulnerable, their life is turned upside down. And for Rosemary, who had the caregiver support group, it was important for her to go into a group where she could be with other people who knew what it was like to walk into an empty house, to live in a couple's world and no longer be a we, and have to make decisions as an I all the time. And to explain how sometimes people just don't understand what someone is going through because they haven't gone through it. And so when they come into a group, these people are going through it. For example, I had a lovely lady years ago come in thinking that she was failing grief because her best friend said to her, "It's 3 months already, move on." And of course, the wonderful response from the group and from myself is, what is 3 months in the scheme of life? The woman was married 50 some odd years, and her friend expects her to be the same as she was before. And what I think we need to know about grief is that when we lose someone we love, we are not ever the same. When we lose a significant person in our lives, we change. But that doesn't mean that we don't have the right to bring joy into our lives for the time that we have, because none of us know how long we have. And so part of that reason to come into a bereavement group is to have a safe place to share so you can heal and you can once again start feeling joy into your life and re-engage in life again.
Well, that's so important, because if you're a caregiver and all of a sudden you're not, sometimes caregivers feel like they don't have a life or a purpose, or what do they
They don't
do
have their
now?
job. They don't have their
Yeah,
job
their
anymore.
job.
And that
That's
is an
right.
additional loss. Before their day was taken care of and they had someone else to constantly think about and do for. And all of a sudden, they're alone and the only one to take care of is self. And they're not used to doing that often. And there really is a sense of loss and emptiness and loneliness. And that's why the support group can be a place to kind of help with that.
So, Dale, you just mentioned, good segue. You talked about someone coming into their home now. They've lost a loved one, and the home is empty. Everything's quiet. Their routines are disruptive. They don't have that partner to communicate with. They don't have that daily companion. Even if the person
Mhm.
had declined, they were still there. They were
They were
still a
still there.
companion. They were still somebody there with me. And all of a sudden, everything is changed, like you said. And you mentioned about the bereavement support group makes them feel they're not alone, alone in all of this. But explain the difference between being alone and being lonely, because sometimes that can be kind of confusing too.
Well, I think it's important to understand that we can be in a room with 1,000 people and feel very much alone. And we can be by ourselves if we're in a good place and not feel alone or lonely. And, the support group can take a place of some of the feelings that they have or the triggers that they experience. But they do know that they can come back to the group and they have a place to share it. And, you know, I think that sometimes people in the group have shared that their loved one may want them to go to independent living so they're not alone because they hear that their parent is lonely. And what they don't realize, their parent would be lonely there too. They're lonely for their spouse. They're lonely for the loved one that they don't have anymore. And it doesn't matter where they are. But one of the things that I do know is that we cannot run away from all the feelings that we have. We must face them and deal with them. And like Rosemary does, she expresses it not through only the wonderful things that she shares in the group, but also through her journaling and writing. And other ways of expressing it as well is through art and music. Not everyone is articulate, but there has to be a way that we can express it because otherwise it goes inward and it's not healthy. And so that I think is a very important piece. And one of the things I wanted to share in terms of people, how they feel about their feelings. We live in a world where particularly men more than women are not encouraged to show their emotions, to express their feelings. And when I do an intake, I can't tell you how many times someone has told their story and started to cry in front of me and then right away apologize. And I always say to them, you don't ever have to apologize to me or anyone else out there. And there's a saying that I want to share. The eyes are the windows of the soul. And when we cry, we're just washing those windows so we can see better. And I want them to feel comfortable with their feelings. And I have to say, as they get to know each other and trust one another and trust me, they do. They share all of their feelings and they know that it's okay to do so.
I love that analogy,
Yeah.
washing the window so you can see better, because you're
Yeah.
allowing your feelings to come out, and crying is very good for people, and it
It's a
really
release.
does help. And yes, it is a release. So that being said, Dale, you talked about the lady whose friend thought she should be kind of over everything in 3 months, right? So, is there a special time, length of time? Is it different for everybody? What is short? What is long? And what do people in general think about that? I'm sure you've had a lot of discussions in your group about that.
You know, unlike child development, where we say someone should walk by, a child should walk by a certain time and talk by a certain time, I don't believe in putting pressure on saying, oh, you as a widow should be in this and this place. I think it's important for people to understand that grief is a very unique experience, like a fingerprint or a snowflake. It's a unique experience, and they need to go through that process in their own time and in their own way. Now, there are situations which we may call complicated grief, and often people that may have a predisposition that have mental health issues may have more difficulty with grief, and that means that they aren't able to connect with anyone, they can't engage in any activity, and they can't think of anything but the loss. But the people that are coming into the bereavement groups that I'm running are coming in because they want to connect and they want to feel better and they want to know how to go forward and re-engage in life. And so I think it's really important to understand that there is no set time, that we go through it in our own time, and that sometimes some people may move faster than others. And that depends often on their coping skills that they've gotten through living, and also the kind of relationship they had with the loved one that died. And that is unique. So even though widow and widows come into a group, their situation is still unique to them. And that has to be respected. So I can't really give you to say, oh, this is okay by this time or not. But I do think that when you allow them to go through it and not judge themselves, they can do it easier and with less pain.
Yeah, no one really has, the right to judge anybody's journey, whether it's caregiving, whether it's bereavement, or whether it's anything else in life, right? We're not to judge.
Absolutely.
We don't know what others are feeling and going through. And a smile walking down the street giving to somebody could make their day because you don't know what they're going through. So we really aren't in that position. That being said, was told of a lady who was married over 50 years. She cared for her husband. He died of a heart attack. And he was disabled after that, and she cared for him. And when he died, she spent a couple years grieving, trying to heal herself, go through all of this. She thought she was ready to move on, and she met a nice gentleman. And her story goes that she liked him, but when he made an offer to give her a kiss, she kind of panicked and kind of flailed back, and all of a sudden all these feelings started coming up in her again, and she was afraid, and she felt guilty, and all these feelings. And so, to your point, when you said feelings don't really go away, that they're always with us, this is I think an example of this lady who wanted to move on, but she wasn't ready, for herself, right? And so the question is, does the pain ever go away? How do people process that?
Okay. As I said earlier, when we lose a significant person in our lives, we're not ever the same. And if anyone says to you that you'll feel like you did before the loss, then they really don't know what grief is about. Does the pain go away? Well, I hand out in the group something called a grief loop, and it's loops, and they get smaller and smaller as time goes on. And what's interesting is that when I ask them, what do you see? They'll often say, well, I see these small loops and it's going on, but they never get the one very important point that is that I think really is an important message, that even when we have a trigger and even when we feel pain, we don't go back to where we started. It may feel like that at the time. Now, triggers can be dealing with an anniversary that's coming up, dealing with a holiday that has significance. Um, and these triggers, as we begin to heal, whether you do it through individual counseling or through a group or through the support of friends and family, those triggers in time will diminish in the intensity and their frequency. But that doesn't mean they go away. 10 years from now, someone may hear a song on the radio that has such meaning and they can well up because we carry our loved ones with us. And if I ask people, would you ever not want to have that? And they would never, ever give up. Even with having the pain, they would not give up carrying their loved one with them. So to answer you, I don't really think the intensity of the pain may go away, but we still feel these triggers because we're always connected to them. Now, as far as the lady who was not able to go forward in the relationship, people have to respect where they are at. Sometimes they may think they're ready when they're not. And I have to also tell you that in many groups, they are wanting companionship, especially if they had a good relationship. They want to have companionship again. And I always think of this one lady who, when other people in the group were saying that that's what they would like in the future, she was saying, absolutely not. No way do I ever want to have a companion. And I said, okay. And then a year later, I bumped into her and she said to me, you'll never believe it. And I said to her, oh, yes, I would. Because how we feel at one moment in time may be very different at another moment in time. But everyone has to decide what feels right, what is good for them. They have to listen to their own inner voice.
Listen to your heart too, you know? I mean,
Listen
and
to your heart. Very important.
we carry our loved ones in our heart. We carry their memory with us for as long as we live, and they're in our heart,
Mhm.
and that's where they stay with us. Rosemary, I know that after your husband passed earlier this year, you transitioned from the caregiver group into the bereavement group. Has that helped you?
Mhm.
Oh, it's tremendous. I mean, I really think that anybody who suffers a loss, whether it's a spouse, a child, a father, a mother, a sibling, should definitely go to a bereavement group, because one of the things that Dale said is 100% true. I have a wonderful family. I really do. My kids are fantastic. My grandkids, I mean, they're very, very caring, and I know they care deeply about me. But when you walk into one of these groups, everybody knows exactly how you feel. And if I had listened to Dale talking about this even a month ago, I'd be in tears. But over time, I described it to somebody I met here who just lost somebody. Over time, that heavy weight begins to lighten a little bit. And when just the fact that you know these other people are feeling the same thing, they care. And by talking it out with one another, you see that you're not alone. And you see there is a way forward and there is a way out. Somebody asked me, Rosemary, why don't you write about loss, which I'm thinking about and I'm going to do. But I said to them, how do you write about emptiness surrounding you? And that's what it feels like. There's just emptiness around you. Even if you are in a room with 100 people, you could still be surrounded by emptiness. And I will tell you that anybody who goes into any one of Dale's groups will come out the better for it. She is beyond fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, I hear a lot of compliments about Dale and her work. So, Dale, we're talking about feelings, and we talked about feelings that caregivers have, and now we're talking about feelings that people that have lost a spouse have. And one of the feelings we haven't talked about is fear. And
Mhm.
I recently ran into an acquaintance whose wife had died of cancer 9 years ago. And he said, I didn't want to meet anybody else. I live my life, and it's been 9 years, and I've been by myself, and I've, been busy and doing things. And he said, finally, somebody asked me if I wanted to meet somebody. And he said, it'd been 9 years, but I never said yes before because I was afraid. I was afraid of getting hurt again because he suffered so much with the loss of his spouse who had cancer. He was afraid to move on, afraid to take a chance. And those were his words. I'm afraid to take a chance. But 9 years later, he did, and he seemed very happy. So talk about that fear, about, it's a process, and it's a little bit about the moving on process, but talk a little bit about fear, if you would.
Well, I think that many people that come into the group in terms of talking about what their future will be, they can be fearful. If they've been a caregiver, many of them don't want to do that again. They also don't feel that anybody can replace their loved one. And again, you shared that experience, but this man had to live 9 years, and he got to the point where he finally felt comfortable to say, yes, introduce me. He was ready. Not everyone is, and that's okay too. Some people who lose a spouse are happy and content to be with their friends and to socialize with friends and family, and are not interested in having another relationship because they're afraid of loss again. And yet, we can always be afraid. And young people can be afraid of getting involved in a relationship because it may end at one time. So we do have to decide what do we want to risk? And I think of this one widow who came to my group and was widowed 3 times. She was widowed as a young woman with young children. She was widowed at middle age, and then widowed later on. And she was a caregiver in one situation. She was also had a sudden loss in another situation. And she shared there was no better way to lose someone. They were both difficult. But she didn't regret risking the relationship. She said each man was wonderful to her and gave her what she needed at that point in time. But she had to take the risk. And that's something that each person has to decide for themselves. What do they want? Because what they have to gain is another loving relationship. But it does come along with the possibility of losing someone again. But you have to weigh, how much do you want that loving relationship? I hope
Oh,
that
Teele,
answers.
you gave me goosebumps on that one.
Yeah.
I love talking to both you ladies. You both are so sincere and compassionate and passionate about sharing your expertise and your experiences. Dale, if somebody would like to contact you specifically, we're here in South Florida in Palm Beach County. Could they do that if they have a question for you? And how could they do
Of
that?
course. Of course. They can call my work voicemail, which is 561-238-0236, and leave a message for me. And I pride myself in getting back to them as soon as I can. We are Zooming right now because of COVID. We're not meeting in person. But anyone who is in the state of Florida, where I am licensed, can also attend our group if they feel that they need a caregiver support group or a bereavement group. All they need to do is contact me, and I will be more than glad to go over answer any questions they may have.
Can you give that phone number again, please?
Sure. It's 561-238-0236. Just leave a message with your name and make sure to leave your telephone number so that I can get back to you.
And if someone is not in the state of Florida, because we're worldwide on the web, on the internet, how would someone go about finding a support group or a bereavement group if they're in another state?
Well, they can, of course, go online and look for support groups in their area. In the past, before COVID, many hospitals conducted caregiver groups and bereavement groups. I don't know if they're still able to do that now because of our present situation. Also, hospice provides bereavement groups as well. A lot of community centers, Catholic Charities, as you know, Jewish Family Services provide these groups. So they can also call those centers and those places and find out. And if some place doesn't provide that service, they may be able to refer you to someone locally that does.
Very good. Very good advice. Well, last word of advice, Dale, for any caregivers you'd like to share before we have to close?
I think the most important thing that I really want to stress is for caregivers to know to take care of themselves, to be able to balance caring for their loved one if they are doing so, as well as caring for themselves. That it is important to know that you have a right to enjoy and to balance this really difficult job, because so often caregivers don't believe that they should be enjoying. Just like widows sometimes have a hard time allowing themselves to move forward and enjoy life. But if I can just stress this one point, as long as we all are on this side of the world, we have a responsibility and a right to bring as much joy into our lives as we can for the time that we have.
Amen to that. Well, I want to thank both you ladies so much for coming on to the show today. It was just so wonderful to have you and to listen to you, and to be well and stay well. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you
Dale. Thank you, Rosemary.
for
Thank you for
having us.
having us.
It's been a pleasure.
I want to let
It
everybody
really
know,
has.
too, that last week we had with us in our studio, last week's show, we had Linda Burhans, and she talked about caregiving, and she mentioned a conference that was coming up. And I want to let you all know that there's still time to sign up for that conference. It's called the Connecting Caregivers Virtual Conference. It's going to be
Wonderful.
November 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, 2021. It's hosted by Linda Burhans, the girl who cares for the caregivers through hope and light and lessons learned. And if you would like to sign up for this virtual caregiver conference, I would highly recommend it. There's going to be 3 days of all kinds of wonderful speakers on lots of different topics. How to register? Go to connectingcaregiversconference.com. That's all you have to do. Connecting Caregivers Conference, all together.com, and you can register for the conference. Even if you can only attend 1 or 2 days or 1 day, once you register, you will have access to all 3 days worth of seminars and teaching. So it's a really, really good way for caregivers to get connected and learn a lot more. And so I encourage everybody to do that. Also, I want to encourage you to get your copy of the 36-Hour Day book. It is a great resource. Send an email to delray@arden-courts.com with your name, address, telephone number, and get that book in your hands or in the hands of someone that you may know that doesn't have the book, because it really could help them navigate the journey of caregiving a little bit better. And call Dale and get some more information about what she's doing with her support groups. And Rosemary, thank you again for sharing. I know that you're helping caregivers every day with your experiences, so I applaud you for that. So I thank everybody for coming today. Thanks for joining online or on the iHeartRadio app or on Southeast Florida AM and FM radio stations. Be sure to be with us next week, every Tuesday at 6 o'clock p.m. when we share another wonderful group and another wonderful stories and help and expertise from a person that is going to help you, whether they're a caregiver who have walked in your shoes or a professional expert in their particular field. It's all good and it's all necessary, and we encourage you. So thank you all for joining us today. I hope to see you next week. In the meantime, take care of yourself and have a good evening. Good night.
Good night.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Solutions with Marcia Teele. Join us next week as Marcia, who has 15 years of Alzheimer's disease and dementia care experience, brings you more needed information to help with the care of your loved one. This show can be seen again on caregiversolutions.info, and questions can be left on the site, which may be used on the program to help others. See you next week for more Caregiver Solutions.
The opinions expressed on the preceding